everyone to watch. Now, what I am excited about, and I really can't wait to see, is The Hawk on Netflix with Will Ferrell, which is just come out.
Yeah, and it looks fantastic. I love anything with Will Ferrell in it. And Sky really has some excellent offerings. I'm watching the 5-star Weekend starring Jennifer Garner at the moment, which is a Sky exclusive. After that, I've got season 3 of House of the Dragon on HBO Max. And now that is something I've been really looking forward to for ages.
Yeah, no, it's a super show. I'll put that on my list once I finish Vanderpump Rules on Hey You. And of course, the one that I think a lot of people have been looking forward to is the final season of Disney Plus's The Bear, where Jeremy Allen White puts in an amazing, all-time brilliant performance.
Yeah, he is fantastic in that. So, get Sky TV, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Netflix, and Hey You together for just €27 a month for 12 months. All in one package, and that is amazing value.
So, no matter what you're into, Sky has you covered. Search Sky Deals to find out more. To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? Are you frustrated? Were you angry? Were you, let's just say, tearing your hair out as John was literally at the end of the last podcast with Sinead O'Sullivan about the inefficiencies, about the lack of data, about the lack of targeting, about the lack of overall plans in the Irish government setup. And again, this is something that people discuss in Ireland at the pub, when they're going for a stroll, we're at the kitchen table. The big question is, where is all the money going? Where is it going? Who's getting it? Do we know who's getting it? And that expression, value for money, is what that again and again. What actually does that even mean, value for money? All we know is that the Irish state's budget has risen exponentially, particularly current expenditure. So the expenditure of running the place day to day has increased dramatically over the last 10 years. Now, in fairness, the economy has expanded, the population has expanded, there's all new issues that need to be dealt with. It's not as if we're actually dealing with something that is standing still or just throwing money at it. I've always said, and anyone who listens to the podcast knows that I think the economy is a live, vulnerable, fragile, fantastic ecosystem that is never inert, it is never asleep, it's always moving, it's always awake, it is always shifting, shaping again. So, not surprising, money is spent, but the question is, where does money go? Which is the Sinead O'Sullivan key question. And luckily, we have a young man on the podcast today. Matt Feldman is a theoretical physicist. He is part of a group, which I'm going to talk about in a second. He's problem solving association. He is applying his own mathematical data savvy brain to try to understand where all the money is going. Do we have any basis for even knowing who the contractors are who are getting government money, what they're delivering?
Hi, Alexis.
Does one part of the government speak to, so that we can pinpoint in one piece of data where the money is, who's spending it, etc. Matt Fennan, you're very welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Good, thanks for having me on, David.
Not at all. Tell me, Matt, let's identify the problem, which is government spending. Let's identify what is going on inside. Anybody has any sense of where they're going? Fine. Let's start. You did the legal circle.
It is very warm here in Dublin.
Yeah, so I would have finished my leaving in 2017, back when, I think the overall state budget we would have spent around 68 and 60. And now it's today, 2026.
Just outside Blanchardstown, kind of heading towards Ashburn, I suppose.
Okay.
Heading on the motorway up here now
Quite
for
big,
Ashburn.
so that time period, I was college, a few jobs, and I started to think to myself about, what are things that I'm interested in. So my background, I studied economics in college, and I found it in my course on the subject that I studied, they're either working in finance or they're academia. And one of the things that kind of drove me to do the work that I'm going to talk to you about, I kind of sat down one day and I realised, yes, I could go work for a bank, I could go work for a private firm, but fundamentally the things that I would like out of my life,
Bank holiday weekend, look. days.
To be able to have nice public spaces. I might want to cycle back, I might want to metro, I might want to like an extra use, right? And I was like,
And maybe a house to live in.
yeah, no, a house as well, right? So, but then I kind of realized that no matter how independent wealthy I get, I don't think currently with the way I'm viewing it, that that's the way that these things can happen. I think the state can be a really powerful tool to do some really important things. And I kind of thinking about like even if there's a moment in my life where I get to help and contribute in a positive way to which I can even 1%, potentially that's a million that's my contribution to society. But if I get a pension or something, I'd like to have that. So that's kind of starting to move and kind of focus on these kind of more societal problems.
When you decide to look at public expenditure, public procurement, explain to me, the listeners, what you found, how shocked you were, where it led you.
Yeah, so in terms of value for money, as you can hit on, is this term that we all hear, and I don't think it's common.
Can't you need
So
border?
one of the things where my training is kind of breaking things down to kind of a simple like abstraction that can all understand and have a conversation about. So I just was like, well, there's these big spending codes, there's all these regulations and rules that the state has to follow. So it's like, well, let's just break it down to the transaction. Essentially, where is this money going? As I've hit on earlier, you've mentioned the state's got so big, we're spending all this money. So the state spends money on like social protection, spends it on wages, spends it on all these types of things, grant rates, which can be a bit complicated to kind of have a clear conversation of what's this value for money. It's like hire extra teachers or hire extra staff. Just procurement, where there's a very clear need. There's also kind of a big contribution. So one basis I found where EC, the Children's Hospital, like say, the arts case, all of those are things that the state's got to procure. So just like, well, there should just be a list of all things, right? There should be projects, there should be a contract, there should be this. So why is there just one central list of all projects over a certain size in the state? Did we buy things at the price we expected to pay? Did we get back what we wanted in the end? Did they finish on time? This doesn't exist. The system doesn't design. Well, it's the
Two things going on here. One is that the state has expanded so dramatically and it has to look outside for expertise that it just simply doesn't have in the consular service. So when you're building a hospital, for example, you need to outsource that building to builders who can develop it, right? Because you don't have a state hospital building unit. And kind of thankfully you don't, because I think that in a way, if you're employing the best builders, they would employ the best technology, they will have the best expertise, they will have the best practitioners, and hopefully that decision to outsource to a contractor will save money and will lead to the best outcome. Let's look at the process or the moment when the state decides to build a hospital. What then happens?
So what happens then is there would be an awful lot of paperwork. Like people would have sat down around the table and go, look, we have a need. There's some demand for something, and we've now decided this is the thing we want. What happens is they enter a procurement process. They will have a tender, which basically outlines to the market what they're basically looking for and what they want. If there's any kind of procurement experts listening, there's lots of different ways that the state can engage them to get into it. But what happens afterwards is someone eventually, the state goes, well, this person's doing it, and they award that contract. So then now it's like, well, we're going to build a hospital. This person's
Here comes the rain, I'd say.
and the rules
Very
that we
dark.
have both in Ireland and the EU that focus on procurement really only go to that person. It's about did we give it to the right person? So was it given unfairly? And did we communicate
Yeah.
with people that actually
There we go.
So, because I'm older than you, I would probably appreciate that this particular moment was the moment of corruption in the old world, right? So in the old world, there would be a fellow who knew a fella who was a friend of a politician who owned another politician. So that was the corruption of the 1970s and 80s. So in a way, the state is obsessed with fighting the last battle, which is the corruption battle. So if the procedure of giving the contract is seen to be clean, fair, and corrupt, you're saying
responsible for that type of spending. So that could be the expenditure of the department transfer. So cabinet don't have access to that centralised view of like these big projects that we spent. So it is this, yeah, as you said, the last one. It's this hyper focus on big stuff. But we'll get on to the podcast later on that actually the rules that we've written around that have actually given have not achieved the outcomes, which is about more competitiveness. We'll get on to that. But yeah, so it just stops. So suddenly I'm now working on a project. I've given the award to company A. The mechanism in place to then monitor and maintain that project and sit on it and get the value there aren't really there. You know, like across most state entities, we don't have the skill sets that might exist in the private sector to sit on it. So a very simple question, right? Well, like, so I could elucidate it for people is I would have been working with members of the team. We would have asked all the departments in the state and a number of agencies if they could provide a list of contracts that are currently on over under budget, and a lot of them couldn't provide that. So I think what this becomes is we're transparent about what we're going to do and who's going to do it, but I don't think they'd actually have sufficient management level information to then manage those in a way that can actually get the value for it. The way that say the public might perceive what value is.
My pleasure. Why not? I would have thought that one of the basic jobs of managing money is knowing how much you're managing, who is getting it,
Yes.
what you're getting it for, and be able to cross-reference that with the competition, what was said was going to happen, what actually did happen, with the outcomes. Are you saying that we're dealing with a black hole in effect?
Yes. Now, depending on the entities and the agency or department that is the contact authority for that, they will have fantastic. It's not a shared standard. There's something that they go back and just more systems and time. There's actually some departments right now that
No, I'm coming back from Dublin. So I'm heading towards Slane now, I suppose, on the kind of Derry Road.
We also don't have a number for how much is going to be future. And this is part of this big project. So procurement is, as just come back, it's like you're getting access to do something. So everyone here has a bank information, everyone here goes looking for statements of income. And I'm just going to talk about shopping for example. So I see my Tesco shopping.
No, from Loud.
So there's no bank. So I would go, well, if I'm going to just go to Tesco here, I should just get a product. I would just go to Tesco. And I can figure out, well, how much is my place to spend on Tesco?
Hi, Rosalie, I think her name is.
Like this year, Matthew and his house is going to spend on Tesco. The state and the SB procurement is based on spending with the copy as well. There's no less than that. So back to the process. We've asked to do the tender of the contract agreement isn't actually spending, and that's the number of the state. And also the EU in most cases to estimate how much we're spending on procurement. So it's an estimate. Yes, and it's also sometimes.
Yeah, my eyesight's not the best. Rosalia.
I understand. Response to questions. There's a legal obligation on people to publish this content,
No.
but there's no consequence for not publishing.
Don't drive a Mercedes.
There's a policy telling
Drive a Volkswagen Golf.
to do this thing. No one evaluates it, and like there's no one's one job to go and make sure that people are compliant. It's assumed, or that responsibility lies with the Individual Contract Authority, usually with the accounting officer. And so the department that's in charge of all these policies stuff is using a figure that they know that there's issues with the data, but they don't actually go and check or maybe force people to publish it better, you know?
So I think there is, again, I know that this podcast is hosted, we're getting, this is the podcast for accountants and being accountants, this particular podcast. There is a department called the Department for Public Expenditure. I would have thought that in a non-Orwellian world where black means white and good means bad, and that the Department of Public Expenditure's job is to hold the purse strings on all the public expenditure, as written on the tin. Am I wrong?
So they do, but not in the like. See, deeper is it's quite a controversial topic, I'd say. But you might be talking to some people that might think we should do their job differently. But how they do it, my understanding of how they do it is kind of through this kind of business cases or valuation afterwards. And actually, quite interestingly, it's something to urgently officer. They actually used to kind of
LGBT. This is, again, I come back to 1984. The reason is that I've actually again over the summer
So left here for Emerald Park or Potato Park or whatever it is you want to call it now.
Invention can understand truth from fiction, etc. So deeper is the department for
public expenditure reform. They also
Fuel
have
today.
a number of other things. There's some very, very capable people in those organisations doing they're working incredibly hard. There's people in there that are trying to those organisations.
182 for petrol, 195 for diesel.
But I'll go back to the point that I wanted to make of they did actually kind of do what we were talking about there, look at the actual spending of money. So they used to do these fantastic reports that I encourage anyone to go and look at online. There's the tender and payment analysis reports, where for 2013 up to 2019, they would have basically taken a sample of the largest public bodies that spend on the current and asked them to give them their expenditure level data. I think it was near the invoice level. And there's these fantastic reports going, well, the state actually spends this money on SMEs. These are the things we're spending money on. And understanding the suppliers we engage with. So they would have released the 2019 report in 2022. But since then, they've been no longer to produce these reports because they don't have a legal basis actually to get this information. And to me, that is kind of worrying, you know?
Should not the legal basis be taxpayers pay money for a service? We are not mandated about how much tax we pay.
I am.
That is clear.
I am indeed.
So it disappears. It disappears into a system.
Just driving
That
from
system
Dublin up
spends
to
the money
County Loud.
is and should be minded by someone. The legal basis is the social contract between the citizen and the government. I would have thought.
Yeah, and I just revenue very good at collecting money off people. If you ever talk to people and everything, they have fantastic technical capabilities to what they think you owe and actually.
the lights are fierce bright on
So
this
I would have
car.
thought the absolute precision to grab money from us, from businesses, and get it into the system. I think it's a fair assumption that why would you not have the same level of focus and precision when you're then using it?
Can I just ask you, just again, as a citizen, as somebody who's applying yourself to look at this tobacco, why do you think there is such a culture? The way I see it, and many people on podcasts would say it, it's only when the media hound a certain project, like the Children's Hospital, or like the Arts Council, or like that eventually and begrudgingly someone rocks up in front of the Public Accounts Committee and begins to ventilate and to make public these basic issues. That seems to be a culture of denial, of secrecy.
Or sometimes just not knowing, right? So you talk about the Arts Council, and you talk about the Children's Hospital. Basically, there's an obligation to state entities. So how we did this analysis was there's an obligation to state entities to produce reports of payments or purchase orders in excess of 20,000 per rate. That was an obligation that was as a result of a growth in the commitment in 2011, and then a public reform kind of plan in 2012, and then it was proposed in 2016. But there was an obligation of them to produce this. No one ever looked for the Children's Hospital to publish the statement until 2025. So we had all these committees, all these things, but yet people were going, well, let's just look at the transactions. I think it's also about how we talk about it. Maybe there's a skill set of people who questions this as well. Or maybe we just assume that the transactions were there and people were looking at it. You know, that's what I think it's maybe also. So I would say it's not. I just think that it's how we talk about it and the system talks about spending is the same. And that's where the issue is, and that's maybe where the perception sometimes is. Now, yes, look, people do deliberately obfuscate information and they do dodge and dip and dive. But the Children's Hospital still have not published all the purchase order data since they've started the project, which they would have had the obligation to do so. And what's troubling to me though about that is I would think the biggest scandalous project
cruise control on there, whatever it's called, radar cruise control. So the car will brake when it wants to brake.
Q4 2025.
I don't have to.
Why don't we have Q2 for the public so they can see what's happening and going on and judge the activity?
That's pretty, I mean, it's kind of, again, what I'm going back to is this is, how do you run a country if you don't know what you're running?
Yeah, the fear that I have is, because we have Andy Burnham over in the UK as a big prime minister, and we've had lots of prime ministers there, and we now have in this position where we're playing issues here, and we have this idea of leaders and individuals. My fear is that, I would hope that we're on a ship, right? We're all on the same ship, and there's a captain's bridge, we've got our head of state, we've got our senior civil servants, that there's levers and there's dials in there that they can interact with to changes to the course of our ship. People don't know the boats are even there, and maybe it's a meant that people had to publish this data. It was no one's job after. So, for example, people could go find online to remind people, in this case, local authorities, that they now had to basically do versus 20,000, right? But the Department of Housing had never at any point checked the compliance because they viewed it wasn't their job. Their job was just to remind people of this obligation. So if you scale that up, and you've seen how big the state has gotten, I don't think there's anyone necessarily in the systems that has a very, like, knowing how something that's spending about 70 million euro a year, even with adjusted for inflation and stuff like that, like, managing that expenditure is very different to something that's maybe spending up to 140 million a year. With all these now competing demands, you've got to build houses, you've got to build infrastructure, you've got to manage the trade deals that certainly come from what's going on in the United States and happening globally. Like, all of these different things are coming at you.
Does anyone know if I'm allowed to like listen to music on live streams or not?
And then also
YouTube kind of disagree with it.
Maybe this is also one of the issues as well, that there's political decisions that come into this. It's not just a purely rational idea of what value is. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think there should be kind of a very simple register of all our spending and all the contracts, because value is subjective. So if we go different to the right, what we buy, like what we look for, is going to be different than what they think is good value for money and I think is good for value for money. I might think what you think is fantastic, you know, whereas if you're an athlete, it's like, hold on a second, this isn't going to work out too well because I've got a match on the weekend, you know?
What you found is that there is no consistent data benchmarks where the money is going. Just to remind the listeners, we're talking about big capital projects. The lion's share of government spending is current expenditure, which is even more slippery because it's even less likely to have an end outcome. So at least in the context of Children's Hospital, there is a thing that will be finished at some stage, right? And that project will therefore come to a close. Current expenditure is a totally different creature because it is open-ended.
Yes.
How do you, when you've looked at current expenditure, what do you see?
Yeah, what I see is sort of I think a lot of people look at the Big Four and what they do. And I found it very odd when I started seeing on one of their websites in college that they were talking about working with the public, working with the state. My understanding of what the Big Four was is they provided audit services and like advisory to the large multinationals. So during this project, it turned out, right, KPMG and Deloitte, right? And we hear these conversations basically made the decision recently for outsourcing it to right, because they would have been able to status consultancy to insource this and it would reduce cost. But I don't think until our work, like anyone actually knew how much is being spent. So like in our data set, which we'll talk at the end about, there's about 1.13 billion euro across 8,649 records. So that's like rows in a spreadsheet, right? Across 142 state bodies where the Big Four is being paid. And if you look at 2025 data, it's now broken 200 million euro a year. It would have been like sub 100 million, sub actually 90 million in 2020. So we're seeing this massive growth. And the issue here is actually the growth could be because maybe people are reporting data better, or is it actually the state has now massively increased its dependency and use of consultants?
What are the state, let's say the Department of Education, right? Which engages one of these big companies for what?
Yes.
What are they doing?
So when we look at the data, right? So we're just going to look at Ernst & Young, for example. They've been paid by the Department of Education basically nearly 35 million euro. So from 2019 onwards, they're basically getting paid like 7 to 8 million euro a year.
What are they doing?
It just says contract services, contractor, contracting services, ICT services, and contract services. And the issue, right, is so this data from the issue is I actually can't link that back reliably to the contract award notices led to them getting paid. The Department of Education can't just decide to pay you one process. But all it says if you go look at all you see is contract services. And in the information, I can't evaluate if we got value from it. It might be that EY are providing great value to the state. You know, they're doing a great job. But we can't tell.
Wait a second. Look, Let's just think of what the Department of Education does.
Yeah.
You teach kids, they're not doing that. You build schools, they're not doing that. You maintain schools, they're not doing that. What are they doing?
Like from my reading of the contract award notices, but I'm not comfortable to like link them together yet because
No, but I'm just asking on behalf of the average dude. I'm asking.
I think they're helping with accounting services.
There's
for schools.
roadworks
That's
up
what
here.
I think's going on. That's what I think the payments are for.
Just and everybody up.
Exactly. It's not clear. Like without further questioning, we don't know the answer, and I think that's the issue.
Finally, Matt, you have come up with a solution. Let us talk about your solution. I find fascinating.
Yeah, so the solution is basically that there should be something called a golden thread, right? Where there's a clear link all the way from, so you've got payment to invoice to purchase order to
people
contract
of
to
Mayo.
tender. So basically,
Mayo
it goes,
flagging
if there's a
County
payment in
Meath.
your bank account, right, there should have been a reason for that. So if you're a business, you pay someone that an invoice. If you get an invoice, you don't just pay the invoice without you don't raise a purchase order unless you follow it. Like you don't just go hire a plumber or an IT person for no reason. You would have probably done some sort of evaluation. You then would have signed a contract with them. So there should just be a link with all that context that goes back to the payment so we can understand it. And so in part of that solution, what we basically did is we went to all of these state entities. A lot of them weren't publishing, like a significant amount of them, and we just got them to publish. And we decided to aggregate all this information to a single dashboard that you can now review and look at. So there's about 100 billion now worth of public spending across 216 entities. Now we have like splits, so the NTMA has like 6 different sub reports, so we've treated them kind of like sub entities. But now you can see where that money's going. And I think for the first time you can click on a supplier. So there's a company called Micromail, for example, which I don't think many people know about. I think they basically provide software to the state. They've been paid like 350 million quid. Now, I don't think it's directly on them, I think it's like cost.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. But I think it's money's going through them to purchase licenses for stuff. But it's 117 different entities. So it's 117 different, basically PDFs, if you think about this, right? Have people in a row saying that they've provided something. And in 2025, at a minimum, 63 million euro has been paid. Now, they might not be like netting that. That could be 63 million euro worth of stuff.
No, it could be a holding company for other things. Yeah, but it's going into them, and we don't know what's coming at the far side.
Yeah, and so the solution is they've got this dashboard. But the next solution
There's construction ahead.
is bringing this golden thread. And the thing, David, is that this is actually an EU-wide problem. So the EU spends about 2.5 trillion euros a year on procurement. They have the same issues that we have there. I think from an economist point of view,
Heavy traffic behind as well.
Example is because we know who their suppliers are, they're spending, they can get better value for their customers. So the state is the dominant of everything. Let's not forget. And the dominant power is anywhere economy a dominant position. So it can extract value, can get better value, it knows what's going on. I mean, the upside to knowing what you're spending is enormous, socially, politically, commercially, etc. And you're delivering the better value for you at the end of the day. You know what projects work, what's not work, you know what suppliers work, which suppliers don't work, you know who's taking the piss, who's not taking the piss. These are basic things.
just one of the issues that is that I think if you talk to the kids in the state is that EU basically makes past performance used to judge something. So that is kind of a potential.
More roadworks up ahead with lots of things.
Let me just come back to this discussion. You were saying
There's construction ahead.
a young man, really well educated,
Hi,
doing all
Karami.
sorts of things, but you decided to focus your brain, your time on this idea of make Ireland better. Are you etc., that objective will be closer to, not completion, closer to moving in the right direction, given what you know now about how the Irish state works?
I think I have to hope that it's going to be better in my response. And I think, yes, it was kind of shocking to find out a lot of this information. But I think that what I realized was that once you engage with people and you talk to them about it, the system was able to move. I think the problem is, as you talked about on the last podcast, is it's not the people, it's the system. And I think we've got good hardware. The people in a lot of these places, they work very hard, very competent. It's the software. And look, I just have to hope, David, it's going to be better, because we have the National Development Plan that's kicking into spending. We're going to be spending 270 billion plus euro, most of which to
Volkswagen needed to be braver.
projects that are necessary for our to
Be there all day.
Be a fantastic country. And I think there's some people in the system that are really fighting hard to make sure that the system can be there. If those people are able to be on for the next 10 years and be supported to do what they want to do, I think yes, we're in a position. But the pessimist in me says no, why they're probably winners.
I know you're a betting man. What are your
Yes.
odds?
Oh God, geez, I wouldn't offer any. Like if there's a high market, I would be offering false prices within like 30% chance.
Oh my God, you see, when it comes down to that number, listen, Matt, that was fascinating. Where can listeners find you and your work?
Yes, so if you put it into Google, look, there's a public payment personal tracker, you should find it, or if you go on to my LinkedIn or the TPSA Association.
About green fuel, 192 for diesel, 185 for petrol.
It wasn't just the TPSA, so you should be quite easy to find, or I'll send you the link in the description for the episode.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do that. Matt Fennell, thank you very much. Fascinating stuff, and it's also very reassuring to hear from lads like John and I that there is a generation coming up who can count on your job, which was something that you and I never that famed for, but also who have the altruistic interest in the state and the place where they to actually make a difference. So Matt Fennell, thank you so much indeed.
Great, thanks so much for having me on.
This episode of the Take My Winners podcast is brought to you by Dublin. Progress gets its money.
As you know, energy infrastructure is critical to underpinning economic growth. B&M, for was, is, and always will be an energy company.
And that's why they are currently developing a 7.5 gigawatt pipeline of wind, solar, battery, and biomass projects that enable investment in jobs and competitiveness.
B&M is also delivering renewable energy at scale, helping power Ireland's transition to net zero and supporting long-term energy security and affordability. They combine energy delivery to communities and nature restoration, supporting regional development while protecting the environment for future generations.
And not only are they ambitious, they are also an Irish team. Their investments help the future economic prosperity of the country.
Exactly. If Ireland's economic resilience, regional growth, AI readiness, and thriving communities, it needs the energy backbone supported. And B&M is helping build that partnership.
Learn more at bnm.com.
That's B&M.ie.
Voice. The matches shows St. Helens Hotel Dublin.
It's a Volkswagen Golf.
A 5-star stay.
Unusual one. It's a fully electric Golf. Many of them about in Ireland anyway.
Enjoy our guest rates when you book direct at St. Helens Hotel Dublin. That's St. Helens Hotel Dublin.
Isn't just smooth, it's fast. It always suits me. Big jet engine. Just you can find your connection. Only a well-hospitable motor such as this. It's the means we can get the as fast as because where it should be experienced value for money, it just doesn't work on time, or it's a bloody bike shit that costs a few grand. Whatever it happens to be, once you have to renew the measurement which is no way of managing. So in effect, when you believe it here, our state, by not putting us in the measurement, has allowed itself to end up in a situation where we are not rigorous with management. And the only people who benefit from that is the bureaucracy that built up. It is now so big, I don't think it's ever out the management class that are supposed to be the mechanism where the bureaucracy is answerable to the people at the elections every 4 years. Well, the bureaucracy doesn't care because it's more powerful. That, I think,
Traffic's so bad this way.
is terrifying because bureaucracies, once they become enormous, are very, very difficult to pare back.
Hi, me. This middle seat thing, what's this all about?
Middle seat is the one that nobody likes, and they random allocation can land you in a middle seat and or an aisle seat, and sometimes a window seat. The random allocation is really people who haven't bought their seats, which is a goodly number of any flight. They start allocating, and the computer allocates them. They allocate in a very peculiar order. They tend to give away the cheapest seats first, but not always. And it goes like 133 is the one that everybody doesn't want, and it goes from the back, but it doesn't actually allocate middle aisle or window. It doesn't discriminate. It now randomly lands with a middle. You then get a little message saying, want to avoid the middle seat? That's for you, Tom, specifically for you. They brought that up, and they offer to do it for a fee.
Right, but has that changed now? Are they offering different things? There's this thing called the relaxed row, which the US carrier is introducing. That sounds very different to what we're used to, isn't it?
They would call it different things. Okay, here's how it works. There are basically three different categories. There's the extra legroom. That's what they like to charge for. It's the one at what they call the bulkhead. Usually the emergency exit, wide bodies. You get loads of space. The downside of it is you usually end up with a family with screaming children, because they tend to end up there if they've small babies. The next is the front. People like to get off early, and that's what they charge a little bit extra for. And then there's basically the rest. To give an example of what you're paying for it, Ryanair will charge between €8 and nearly €40, €36 to 50 for the extra legroom. Then the front seats, they're between $7.50 and $22.50. The standard $4.50, and it can be up to 20 on some of the Canaries flight. And that's what you're paying for. And then they do have the option, if you're on that cheapest fare, of just waiting and getting a randomly allocated seat at the end. But you've three categories, and in long haul, and then the US carriers, where this started, I mean, Ryanair didn't start this, they can get even more. And the extra legroom, for instance, on Aer Lingus transatlantic flights, it can be very, very high. You can be paying €130 for exit rows with the maximum comfort on some of the transatlantics. So really, let's face it, the airline has offered, tempted you in. They know that once you've just seen that really cheap fare and you start clicking, they have won the customer. It's then somebody's job, and the computer is very good at this because they know the patterns of behaviour, that they will try and take you down for a few extra bob, and seats is just one of that.
Yeah, it's if you're sitting in row 33, they really don't like you. That's the bottom line of this. I mean,
It's nothing personal. It's just, and funnily enough, when you're check-in with 48 hours to go and you go early, you say, oh, I'll go to a better seat. Sometimes you don't. Quite often you get to the 3s, and the next one they feel is 20, the next one is 19, the next one is 22. Very often you get those, 48 hours to go. You're so much, Tom.
Thank you very much. Of Travel Extra. If you have any tricks yourself, do let us know. 53106.
Brief on News Talk.
SSE Electricity is
estate. Beautifully restored for a new chapter. Discover Michelin dining, warm
Okay, I
hospitality,
think I'll leave it at that.
500 acres of
Uh,
breathtaking parkland.
Thanks for
From riverside walks
interacting
to
with
Eden's Manor. Book your escape today at
If you
medjuliet.ie.
don't mind liking and subscribing, it would be very helpful.
Get savings on hundreds of
Cheers.
products when you scan at the till, like the Queen's Club and Unlock, €10 each.